Volám sa Katarína Stríčková a teším sa, že v rámci podcastov denníka N počúvate môj podcast v ženskom rode, ktorý tvoria rozhovory s inšpiratívnymi ženami. V ženskom rode sú totiž v slovenčine tie najsilnejšie slova: dôvera, pravda, spoľahlivosť, odvaha, múdrosť či pokora. Ale aj zrada, pýcha, nevera, závisť, prehra či smrť. Osobne som presvedčená, že nad nimi všetkými stoja láska a nádej. Nech vás naplňajú po každom vypočutom rozhovore. Welcome to my podcast called V ženskom rode, or In Feminine Gender in English. Every week I talk to clever and inspiring women of different age, education, life experience, and this time, a different nationality too. The reason why I decided to invite my today's guest was her wit, her elegantly feminine yet firm presence, and her ability to speak clearly about some of the most pressing global challenges we face today. As she says,
according to the United Nations, 11 million of girls, because of COVID and because there is no alternative in Africa, for example, will leave school at all.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you Greek former cabinet minister, former member of Greek parliament, former EU commissioner, current president of Dictio think tank, and one of 4 candidates left in the race to become the next head of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, Anna Diamantopoulou. How do you, in Greece, and maybe how you personally, how do you survive all these difficult pandemic days, months? It's been almost a year now.
You're right, it's a gloomy period, and it has been difficult for all people across the world. I think we have to be realistic and think that we Europeans are in a better situation than many other places in the world. So I think that this must be the first point. We must not be always, very pessimistic or try to see the future in a different way. So in Greece, yes, we had the problems as every other country. We were very well positioned in the first wave of the pandemic, so we were among the best countries in the world. It made us very optimistic, and we were very sure about ourselves. And then in summer and in September, things were out of limits, and we have a difficult second wave. And again, I think the government was quite good in reacting in this. People, and particularly young people, were very well behaved. And I'm really surprised because we are not famous about our discipline. But they really respected the rules. I mean, particularly the young people. So during this pandemic, and I spoke about Europe because in all European countries there was support for people, there was support for companies, there was support for workers who left their jobs. So we were not in a chaos as was the situation in Africa or in some Asian countries or in Latin America. So things were much better here, and I think that we have to be optimistic to keep our positive things of the pandemic. And what was this? It was that the pandemic was an accelerator. It was a catalyst for what we know that the 21st century will be: the digital issues, the climate change issues, the need of multilateralism, the need to cooperate between each other. So when we come out of this pandemic, I believe that we can create a different world. I'm not naive, but I think that all governments will try to change things. We cannot continue as we were in the past.
It leads me to a very natural question regarding your candidacy. I mean, you aspire to become the next Secretary General of Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. Maybe an opening question to this is how difficult or easy it is to run in this time where everything changes. I mean, usually my idea is, or maybe a general idea, if people listen and think about that, is that you prepare, you must have some sort of a plan or a project. And you go and you present that plan, that project, your vision, what you think your role will be, the role of the organization will be, how do you see it? And then everything changes. I mean, that the situation to which that plan was drafted no longer exists. And everything changes rapidly, dramatically. How do you cope with that?
I'll tell you. Last March, I had finished my book. The title of the book is From Decevaux to Drones. So it was a book we had worked a lot on the next step of Europe, of my country, in this digital era. In March, it was ready to be edited. And then the pandemic came. So I took it back and I changed it. I worked 3 months, taking into account the pandemic and what was coming. And Katerina, what I saw was that it is not the pandemic who changed things. The pandemic accelerated things. Everything was here. We knew that we had to change our financing system, our manufacturing system, our educational system. We knew that the climate change was a catalyst in our growth model. But the pandemic made it very clear and very urgent. I changed my book. I worked 2.5 months, and then I had the first edition in July. So when the Prime Minister asked me to be the Greek candidate for OECD, more or less I had prepared myself, and the vision I disposed to the OECD Secretariat has taken into account all these changes. And what I tried to say during all these interviews with all countries, because, as a candidate, I had to discuss with 37 ministers of foreign affairs, of economic affairs in every corner of the world. What I try to say is that, yes, there are some priorities. It is the digital transformation, the climate change, the changes in the labor market, in the social systems. But this is not something new. We knew that. But now it is urgent, and we had not just to prepare ourselves, but to change ourselves. And this is what I have done during these 4 months of digital traveling across the world.
Well, change is often very difficult. I mean, people do not like change. It's very, it takes some energy and effort to change little things we do in our little worlds. And it takes courage and a lot of common will to change things which matter to us globally. It is difficult mainly in this multilateral world, as you say. And with all the changes, on national levels with new U.S. administration, with changes in China, in movements in Russia. How do you see, and what optimism, if you have any, I presume you have, drives you to believe that political leaders will be able to be that change, to actually persuade their citizens that change is unavoidable?
I am about 30 years in politics since I was a student. And I'm coming from a country which, after the Second World War, had a lot of difficult moments, as every country in Europe. So during these years, we had a civil war, we have a dictatorship, we have a very deep economic crisis. And in the end of the day, in the end of its catastrophe, it was obvious that we needed changes. And the political word for changes, it is reform. So we need to proceed with reforms. It was extremely difficult. Everybody believes in reforms. In politics, every politician wants to be a reformer. But when the moment comes, we know that everybody wants the reform for the others, not for him or herself. In the end of the day, I believe that, and my experience in crisis, because this is what I've done during my political life, reforms and crisis, I believe that you have always to push. I mean, the political system has to push for reforms. It is not always successful, but there are always steps forward. Even if you see your own country, you know your difficulties, the big difficulties you have after the Second World War, but step by step, things become better. So I am optimistic because I believe that in this multilateral world, where the political system is not isolated, when prime ministers, opposition parties are not in their own cells, but they can see what is going across the world. They can see that the changes is like snowballs. Then they have to be in this road. So at the European level and at the OECD member states, because these 38 member states of OECD are some of the biggest and strongest democracies in the world, I think that after the post-COVID, things will be accelerated and changes will come, even we know that they are very difficult.
I will go back to the EU. You've been a commissioner under Romano Prodi. And as you said, your experience in politics on national and international level is really, big and deep. What is your opinion on situation in the EU? I mean, how is the EU helping its citizens to actually survive this pandemic? I mean, economically, physically, with the vaccinations, and maybe mentally, emotionally, do we have hope that post-Brexit, as you said, COVID era, the EU will be strong as ever, stronger, weaker? How do you see it?
I firmly believe that the European Union is a shield, particularly for small countries like your country, like my country. And I know very well that although there were many mistakes and there are many difficult moments at the European level, the final result is a very good one. Katerina, I have this experience of many years in politics at the local level. I've been a governor, at the national level, a minister, and at the European level as a commissioner. And what I have understood very well is that this European family has been a shield and a fundamental basis for our growth, for our democracy, which is extremely important, and for our surveillance in the world. Now, during the pandemic, I think that we can see a lot of progress at the European level comparing with what happened during the economic crisis. In 2008, it took more than 2 years, the European Commission and the European Council, to react and to put policies in place. But it was quite late, and the drama in many countries was in place. Now, the European Commission and the European Council reacted in a few weeks. Knowing very well the European treaty and the European conditions, I could never believe that in a few weeks there would have been an agreement on economic issues, on establishing the recovery fund, and a few weeks later, an agreement on vaccination, on a vaccination strategy concerning all European countries. Now we have many arguments that the agreement was not very good, that there were problems with the Commission, etc. Yes, but can we compare the situation with what we would have done, Slovakia, Greece, Slovenia, Italy, if they were on their own, if they had to negotiate with these very big companies, having a very small number of vaccines because we're small countries? So I believe that the European Union is really our family. There are always problems in the families, but it is very important to be part of this family for economic reasons, for democracy reasons, for human rights reasons. And we know now that the geopolitical dimension is very important because things are changing. Power, money, political power and innovation are moving towards the East. The East is very strong and very big, and small countries have to be in their own family in order to react, to respond to the new challenges coming from the other places of the world.
How to talk to citizens, to people, about things that the international organizations and institutions bring to us, so that they are not only perceived as bunches of bureaucrats somewhere in Brussels or some kind of legislation and regulation somewhere or some international organizations full of technocrats and politicians talking. How to actually talk in a language which will explain to me, to my brother, my cousin, my nephew, what we are talking about and what actually this is and why it is important.
That's I think, a fundamental question, and it is a fundamental question for the European Union as well. Let me start for a different approach. We all know that the most important instrument is the language, is the way you approach people, the way you make them understand what is going on. At the European level, we have 24 languages, and each country is very proud about its language, and nobody wants to speak in another language. So, according to my experience on efforts, how to communicate with the European people, how the European Commission, the European Union can communicate with people in Slovakia, in Bratislava, in Athens, I understand that always there are two major problems. The first one is the language, and the second one is the feeling of the national political system, its political system, with no exception, that they want to present all good results as national policies and all bad results as European policies. And this has created a very bad atmosphere to people, because people in Slovakia perceive European Union and European Commission through the political language of your own political system. The same in Germany, the same in Spain. So what it is important, there are some interesting campaigns from the European Commission who tried to show in all languages how the European Union influences our life. And you'll see, if you see this campaign, and you can find it in the internet, but for the very morning when we open our eyes, the European Union is there. The pollution of the air, the time in our clocks, the standards in the food and in the milk we have on our tables, the way that the traffic is working, I mean, the standards of the transport means. Everything has a touch of the European Union, and it is always for a good reason. But how do we translate it at the national level? We do not. We do not. What we always do, and particularly the national parties in all countries with no exception, is to come from Brussels and say, this is what it is our win. This is what we want from the European Union.
Exactly.
And when things are not going well, it is the European Union. And this, unfortunately, we're there and we have to obey and we have to do what they say, which is not true. But because if a government does not want to accept something, it has the veto power, but they don't use it. So I think that it is important, at least through the media, to speak to people with their own language and to give them the truth, I mean, the evidence why the European Union is important for their lives. The same, not at the same level, happens with international organizations. I mean, I'm sure that 95% of Slovakian people do not know about OECD. The same in Greece or the same in the Netherlands. But OECD plays a very important role in our lives. And what OECD has concerning taxation and how we deal with avoidance of tax gives back about $240 billion dollars to national governments. So it is very important for everyday life of people, because it is very important for the well-being systems to have back money and to fight tax avoidance. But who can explain it and in a very simple language to everyday people? I think this is the main issue.
You said that OECD is actually the policy pathfinder, using your words, and how it you strengthened several times how it contributed to liberal democracies, reforming and actually, developing after Second World War, that it helps economically, geopolitically, tax avoidance, setting standards. What would be your main goal in actually translating all these important issues to the language people understand? The reason why I'm asking and repeatedly asking this question is that I believe that if politicians do not talk to people in the language people understand, people will stop supporting democracies because it is difficult. In challenging times, it is difficult to have the firm belief in good, in politicians, in state institutions. So I think that the need to talk to people so people understand is crucial What is your vision in that? Should you become a Secretary General of OECD?
You're right what you said about the difficulties that democracy has in difficult and challenging times. And we very well know now that there is a dilemma which is being discussed. Some authoritarian regimes have done better job with the COVID than democracies. So can we have any results on that it is better for authoritarian regimes to be in power? And here I think we have to be very clear and very concrete. Authoritarian regimes in medium and long-term periods are catastrophic for their people, for their everyday life, for democracy, for their human rights, etc. Now, what should I try to do? First of all, I believe that the OECD, the General Secretary, must have a political experience. And why? Because having the leadership of an organization who works a lot with reforms, you must understand the difficulties that governments and politicians in each place of the world have in order to put in place reforms. For the technocrats, it's very easy and understandable that this reform has to take place because otherwise there will be catastrophe in the economy. Okay, it is very easy for a technocrat. And then the politician has to implement something which changes people's life. So what I will try, I will give you two examples. The first one refers to the broader picture, to the broader global picture. I believe that it is important to bring in the OECD conventions, for example, for anti-bribery, for corruption, for the behavior of multinationals in every country, in every corner of the world, to bring countries like China, like India, like Argentina or Brazil. So we need to bring 3 billion people more in the conventions because they are very important for everyday people. And I will try to explain it. When you have very, very cheap shoes from a country which has different rules, it means that okay, it is good for the consumer who has very cheap shoes, but it is not good for your producer of shoes. So the producers we have to ensure that they have a level playing field across the world. So I will try to work with these conventions, but at the same time to persuade people how important it is for their lives. It is not something which has to do with technocrats or politicians in luxury hotels in Paris. And the second important issue is that I believe that OECD can work with each country, with its government on the digital issues, for example. And there we need a digital toolkit for each government because we know that there are big differences from country to country. And I have my own experience with OECD when I was a Minister of Competitiveness. OECD gave me a toolkit for competitiveness with 350 recommendations. And it was such a help for me. Thousands of people had worked on these toolkits, and they gave us something ready, which had been adapted to the Greek sensitivities. So I think that I would help governments on particular issues with particular practical means to work in order to respond to the needs of this new era.
So the OECD can be perceived as someone who shares knowledge and shares experience and its work with others?
Data.
Mm-hmm.
Data. Yes,
yep.
As you said, it is a pathfinder and policy pathfinder, which means it is a reformer, it is a standard setter. OECD has a huge experience that evidence-based studies, some of the best technocrats in the world who can work in order to support governments. And what it is important is that the OECD cannot impose policies, can only propose policies and work with the governments in order to implement these policies.
Do you think that the cooperation with new US administration will be better?
Of course, with no doubt. I think we all have breathed with the new administration. And according to what President Joe Biden has already done, not only what he has already said, we can see that things will change. I mean, the United States are back in the world. I mean, in the multilateral world. They're back in Paris Agreement. They are back in WHO. The minister, Mrs. Yellen, has announced that she will come back to OECD's tables on taxation issues. So welcome back, America, to the multilateral world.
I will go back to three things you mentioned. That was climate change, there was labor market and its future, and digital world. All these three are extremely difficult and very, very challenging, particularly, as you said, and I very much liked what you said, that the pandemic only showed us what we can expect. In my country, in Slovakia, at the moment, all schools are closed. We are only hoping that some will open soon. What will be the impact of this on the future of these children who will be the basis of the labor market in maybe 10 years? What we can do for these children, because we will be dependent on them.
I cannot pretend that I know the impact. And you know, we have a saying in Greece, make me a prophet to make you a king. But we cannot be prophets. What I could say to your very difficult question is that the first point is that all countries had started before the pandemic to work on the digital education. I was Minister for Education 10 years ago, and I had announced and I had put in place the digital school. So it is very important that digital education is part of the educational system. The problem becomes when the educational system becomes a digital one with no other alternative. Again, I think it is interesting to be realistic and not individualist, because according to the United Nations, 11 million of girls, because of COVID and because there is no alternative in Africa, for example, will leave school at all, particularly girls, and means forced marriages and means trafficking, etc. When we come to developed world and we have the alternative of digital education, again, we have some very interesting problems. The equality, the inclusion. Do all children have the possibility to be part of the digital system? Do they have the same conditions? You have 3 children, maybe you have 3 computers. So each one of them can be in its own computer, but it is not the case in all families. And we can see it in many villages that the internet is not there. So even in the developed world, inequalities are here. And we do not have, unfortunately, the same conditions for all children. Another important issue, it is the education of teachers. Before the pandemic, there were some efforts in many OECD countries and many European countries to have particular education for digital digital teaching. But this is not the case again everywhere, and it is totally different to teach on a personal and physical basis than in a digital one. So again, we have a different quality of education. And a last point is that we already know that there are some psychological issues for a big number of children. And they have some symptoms of strange behavior, even biological one, because it is so crazy to have young boys or young girls in a room and they cannot go anywhere, they cannot have any kind of company, etc. So yes, things are difficult. We will see what the impact will be. I think that the good thing is that after the pandemic, digital education will be part of our lives and of our educational system. And if and when this is part of the educational system, it is very good because it can help equality. But at the same time, we shall be ready to face these particular problems for a whole generation. I think we have to be optimistic. Okay, it is 1 year, but this 1 year cannot change the future of these children. I mean, will make their lives a bit more difficult, but it cannot be the main factor for their lives. What will be where it will be the main factor is in these very poor countries that children, and particularly girls, have to leave school. And this will be a catastrophe for their lives, for their countries, and for the world as a whole.
Climate change has been here for years as a topic of discussion. I mean, certainly in some circles of scientists and some politicians, they've been urging others to start taking this seriously, and many didn't. And now some say that this is the pandemic is actually somehow reason of that. What do you see as the crucial thing to start with in climate change?
The climate change is a pandemic in slow motion. And it is here for years and years. And we know that the pandemic, one of the reasons of the pandemic was an issue of the biodiversity policies. So I think that it is the first time that we can see that in the whole world, it has been a number one priority. The European Union is a champion on this issue. I mean, it is the place with the most advanced policies and advanced goals concerning the emissions, concerning the fossil fuel, etc. Now, the United States are coming as part of these champions, and I think that this is a hope for the planet. China has committed itself, although we have to check if these policies are in place. And I believe that the priority for governments and for the international organizations has to be, and will be, we have not an alternative, to comply with the goals of Paris Agreement. So in 2050, zero emissions. I think this is very important. And this means a plan, an action plan for each government concerning pricing energy, fossil fuel, the carbon issue, and other issues concerning technology and innovation on energy.
Do we really need constant growth? Isn't the constant economic growth the reason why we are exploiting the planet in a way we do?
In the way we mediate, yes, you're right. But without growth, we cannot survive because we need jobs for the people. We need money for the infrastructure. We need to support trade among the nations. So we need growth. But what kind of growth? Because if we continue to implement the same kind of policies, then this will be a catastrophic growth for many corners of the planet. And I think in 50 or 60 years for the world as a whole. So we understand that the word growth has a different notion that it had in the past.
As you know, my podcast is mostly about women and what women can bring to our societies, how women perceive the world, what talents women have that are often unseen or unused. So I cannot avoid this question. During the pandemic, we've seen countries led by women which had a little more different approach to coping with the situation, changing the situation or trying to contain it. The media globally discussed this phenomenon. Do you think that women, from your experience, that women have a different approach than men? I mean, we are usually being told from very young age that we have to take care of each other. We have to be empathetic. We need to see others first. Does this give us some sort of a better tool to understand and to tackle things when we have a chance to be managers or leaders?
I started my life as an activist in feminism. And I now understand very well why I did that, because at that particular period, to be a woman, it was a disadvantage. I was in the Polytechnic school. We were only 9 girls among 100 boys. So it was always extremely difficult to survive. Through the years and through all this experience in totally different areas, I have seen many talented men and talented women. I have seen sensitive men and sensitive women, and now I know very well that you have to judge persons on merit. But because of our culture, social culture, and some biological differences, men and women have some fundamental differences. You referred to the way that women prime ministers coped with the pandemic. Women give birth. That means that they have a different sense of life. So you saw that women prime ministers had as a first priority the life, and then all the other priorities, and then the economy, and then everything else. And I think it's something fundamental. The second important issue is that we know very well, since you are an iron mother, and I am an iron mother as well, that in our lives, we had to combine many, many things at the same time. So during my political career and my experience, I can immediately understand how a woman and how a man can deal with an issue. Women are more concrete and they are more quick because they have so many things to do in their lives. So I think these are some interesting differences that you can see and you can identify everywhere.
My last question is, as I perceived you, not only today, but in the past, and during my research, of course, I find it myself quite difficult to be able to sell myself. And I think that many women do. There has been researches about that, but I think that every woman listening to this will understand and will feel the feeling in herself how difficult it is to say something good about herself, to praise herself, to be able to say, well, this is my achievement, this is why I should get the job, this is what I would bring to the job, this is what I am, this is what my talents are. How do you do it? Do you find it difficult? And if not, what can give us this power inside of us that we matter, that we are good enough, and that we can stand for ourselves?
You are right in every word you said. And things are changing, but not very much. So what I would like to say to young women is that, first of all, we have to be strong enough in any kind of criticism, because women usually, when there is criticism, they are going back. They believe that, yes, they are the ones who have the problem, so they have to go back. No, everybody who is in politics, in media, in the everyday fight for work, for jobs, for companies, for enterprises, is a subject of criticism. So be strong with criticism. Take into account, but do not stay on that. The second issue is that we are not perfect. I mean, women all the time believe that they have to be perfect. They must be the perfect mother, the perfect husband, the perfect wife. They must all be very beautiful, very well dressed. They must be smiling, otherwise they're bitches. They have to be they have all the time to deliver excellent results. No, nobody can be perfect. I mean, we can be ugly, we can have bad dresses because we have no time to go and buy dresses and be like models. And nobody is perfect. I mean, men are not perfect at all, but they don't care about that. So accept that criticism is part of life. Don't believe that the others are perfect, because nobody is perfect. And put concrete goals and try to implement them and to achieve them. This is my small piece of advice according to my experience.
It's a very good ending to our discussion today. And I very much would like to thank you for this, Anna. I mean, it was a pleasure looking at you, although I would mostly prefer to be in Athens at the moment. Before we finish, my podcast usually finishes with some very short questions and very short answers. So I will give you some, if I may. What was the best advice you remember you ever got?
When I became a minister, I will be very quick. When I became a minister, there was an old friend of mine who was many years in politics. He came to my office and he said to me, if you want to survive, please don't read the press.
Okay. What would be the advice you would give yourself when you were 21?
Yes, I know. I will tell you the advice, but I know that I would hear no kind of advice when I was 21 years old. I thought that I knew everything. I was very sure of myself, and I did always what I had in my mind. So now I would have said to myself, look, it is not always a matter of fight. You need to compromise. It is so important to know when and how to compromise.
And the last one, if at this very moment you could be anywhere in the world, where would you be?
I have a ready answer because, now during my interviews for my campaign in OECD, as I told you, I discussed with with all ministers of all the 38 countries. So in order to discuss with them, I had to prepare myself to see about the country. I had said videos for the country. So I was really impressed by Costa Rica. So I would like to have the opportunity to be 10 days in a coast in Costa Rica. It's not easy at all.
Ďakujem, že ste počúvali môj podcast v ženskom rode. Ak vás tento rozhovor zaujal, vypočujte si aj tie ostatné. V ženskom rode môžete sledovať a zdieľať aj na Facebooku. Napíšte mi svoje názory, nápady a hodnotenie. Už o týždeň v stredu sa na vás teším s novým dielom.